Long before the first word was ever written, humanity built the foundations of modern thought. The true architects of our abstract world were the ingenious minds of pre-literate societies. They engineered concepts like justice, time, and the divine not with ink and parchment, but with memory, ritual, and monumental art. We will journey to the stone circles of Europe and into the heart of ancestral oral traditions to uncover their lost systems. By the end, your understanding of human intelligence and our deepest history will be fundamentally reshaped. How did a society without writing encode a complex legal system, and what secrets are held in the rhythms of an ancient chant? What does it truly mean to think without written words? These architects were the original engineers of the abstract. They were not primitive people simply surviving. They were elders holding entire legal systems in their memory, storytellers weaving cosmic order into epic tales, and shamans mapping the invisible realms of spirit and medicine. Their minds were living libraries, their voices and rituals the technology for preserving complex knowledge. Think of a master stonemason, carefully positioning a monolith so that the sun would strike it only on the longest day of the year. This was not a random act. It was a deliberate encoding of a concept, the cycle of time itself, into the physical landscape. These individuals translated the overwhelming flow of sensory experience, the changing seasons, the patterns of animal migration, the stark realities of life and death, into structured ideas that a whole community could share and understand. They built the cognitive infrastructure, the very frameworks for justice, time, and the divine that all later civilizations would build upon. This reveals a profound truth that the height of intellectual achievement has never been solely the domain of the literate. The human mind was their living library, and they engineered its very architecture to hold the weight of abstract knowledge. Think of biological memory not as a blank slate, but as a landscape to be shaped. These societies developed sophisticated mental technologies, systematic methods to transform fleeting thoughts into permanent internal structures. One of the most powerful was the method of loci, what we might call a memory palace. This was not mere daydreaming. It was a deliberate technique where a person would visualize a familiar physical space, a cave, a forest path, or even their own home. Into this mental map, they would carefully place the ideas they needed to remember. A legal precedent might be stored beside a specific tree, a medicinal recipe placed upon a particular rock. To recall the information, they would simply take a mental walk through their palace, retrieving each concept from its designated location. This process externalized thought, creating a durable, internal scaffold for knowledge that could survive a human lifetime. But the memory palace was just one tool in a vast cognitive toolkit. Rhythmic poetry and song provided another crucial architecture for thought. The regular beat of a drum, the predictable rhyme and meter of an epic chant, these were not just for entertainment. They acted as cognitive scaffolding. Complex genealogies, ethical codes, and navigational stars were woven into the very fabric of song. The rhythm itself served as a guide, cueing the memory and making vast streams of information easier to recall and transmit without a single error. A story about the stars was not just a story, it was an oral map, its rhythm the grid upon which the constellations were fixed. These techniques reveal something astounding about pre-literate intelligence. They were not relying on random recollection. They were building systematic, internal frameworks to house the abstract concepts their societies depended on. They engineered their own minds to become the living, breathing repositories of law, history, and cosmology, ensuring that the architecture of their thought would endure for generations. These mental architectures of memory and song found their ultimate expression in stone. Across the globe, our ancestors raised monuments that were not just piles of rock, but physical incarnations of their most profound ideas. Consider the towering stones of Göbekli Tepe, arranged in great circles, or the massive trilithons of Stonehenge standing silent guard on the Salisbury Plain. These were not merely temples for ritual, they were three-dimensional models of abstract principles, built on a scale that defied individual comprehension. Their precise alignments with the solstices and the movements of stars did more than mark the passage of days. They physically embedded the very concept of cyclical time into the earth itself. The sun did not just rise, it engaged with the architecture, its light piercing a specific gap only on the longest day of the year. This transformed an invisible cosmic pattern into a shared sensory event, making the abstract idea of cosmic order something the entire community could witness and feel. The construction of these sites was itself a monumental lesson. The sheer, back-breaking effort required to quarry, transport, and erect these stones communicated a powerful, tangible value, the idea of a collective community. Hundreds of people had to coordinate, to labor for a common goal that no single person could ever achieve alone. The shared purpose became as solid as the granite they were lifting. This process was a physical manifestation of a deeper philosophical act, the transformation of chaotic, untamed nature into a human-defined order. They were taking the raw, unpredictable world and imposing upon it a structure that reflected their understanding of the universe. These silent stone sentinels served as permanent communal reference points. In a world without written law or public archives, the monument stood as an immutable symbol of shared identity and cosmic truth. You could point to the great stone and say, "Our people built this together, and the sun confirms its truth each year." It was a truth held not in a scroll or a book, but in the very landscape, a constant reminder of the principles that bound the society together. The architecture itself was the text, and its chapters were written in alignment, effort, and enduring stone. These silent stone monuments were only one part of the cognitive architecture. The other was carried on the breath and in the stories told around the fire. Myths were the living software for these ancient societies, complex narrative programs that ran the essential operations of culture and mind. A story about a trickster god was far more than a simple tale. It was a sophisticated exploration of the abstract nature of chaos itself, a way to examine creativity, rule-breaking, and the unpredictable forces that every community must learn to navigate. Through the actions of a cunning rabbit or a mischievous coyote, people could collectively ponder where order ends and innovation begins. It made the intangible concept of chaos something you could discuss, understand, and even laugh about. This was high-level moral philosophy disguised as entertainment. Creation myths served a similar profound purpose. They provided a narrative framework for the most daunting abstract questions of all: origin, causality, and purpose. How did the world begin? Why are we here? By crafting a story of a world emerging from a great sea or being sung into existence by ancestral beings, these societies built a shared model of causality. They were not just describing how things might have happened, they were building a conceptual structure that explained why things are the way they are now. This narrative framework gave a chaotic universe a sense of order and meaning, a purpose that every member of the community could internalize. The true genius of this system was its method of personification. By giving a face and a story to a natural force like the wind or an abstract ideal like justice, myths made these immense concepts relatable, memorable, and most importantly, actionable. You do not simply obey a vague principle, you follow the example of the honorable hero. You do not just fear a storm, you respect the temper of the thunder god. This transformed the landscape of human thought from a collection of dry rules into a populated world of characters and relationships. It provided a shared conceptual map, a detailed guide to behavior and belief that every person, from the youngest child to the oldest elder, could understand and navigate. This mythic map cemented a collective worldview, binding individuals together with a common story about who they were, where they came from, and how they should live. The myth was the blueprint, and the society was the living structure built upon it. But these stories and monuments needed a space to come alive, a shared experience that would weld abstract ideas into the very muscles and bones of the community. This was the role of ritual, a form of experiential engineering that transformed philosophy into physical reality. An initiation rite provides the clearest example. A young person did not simply hear a lecture about the responsibilities of adulthood. They were taken from their home, led into the wilderness, and made to endure a series of profound physical and emotional trials. Through hunger, solitude, and symbolic death, they did not just learn about the concept of maturity, they lived it. The abstract idea was made flesh, becoming a visceral memory that would guide their actions for the rest of their life. This was knowledge written not on a page but directly onto the human nervous system. The entire community participated in this transformation. Seasonal festivals were another masterclass in this embodied cognition. A harvest celebration was far more than a party after hard work. It was a rhythmic, collective performance of the most fundamental abstract concept, the cycle of life, death, and renewal. As the community gathered to dance, sing, and share the food they had grown, they were not just celebrating a successful crop, they were physically enacting their interdependence with the land and with each other. The act of consuming the last of the old harvest and planting the seeds for the new one made the invisible cycle of decay and rebirth something they could taste, touch, and feel in their tired muscles. The ritual engineered a shared emotional truth, a deep-seated understanding that life is sustained by death and that the community's survival depended on this eternal rhythm. This is where the true power of synchronized action becomes clear. When a group of people moves together in a dance, chants the same words in unison, or breathes in the same rhythm, something remarkable happens to the individual mind. The boundary between self and group begins to soften. You feel the collective intention as a physical force. In that moment, the abstract idea of unity is no longer a thought. It is a sensation, a wave of shared energy that washes over everyone present. This experience of collective effervescence, of transcendence, makes the group's values feel as real and undeniable as the ground beneath their feet. The ritual was the ultimate mnemonic device, a full-body, full-heart technology for ensuring that the architecture of thought became the architecture of society itself. Through these shared, visceral experiences, the community's deepest truths were not just remembered, they were relived generation after generation. This symbolic language was carved into bone, painted on cave walls, and woven into the very fabric of daily life. A single, recurring motif like the spiral was a dense packet of abstract information. It could evoke the unfurling of a fern, the swirling path of the stars, or the cyclical journey of life, death, and rebirth. This was not a simple picture, it was a multi-layered concept made visible, a thought you could trace with your finger. A person encountering this symbol understood its entire spectrum of meaning, from the growth of a single plant to the vast turning of the cosmos. The symbol acted as a cognitive shortcut, instantly accessing a complex web of interconnected ideas stored in the collective memory of the culture. In the same way, animal totems served as powerful, condensed metaphors. The bear was not merely a strong animal, it embodied the abstract principle of grounded power, of hibernation and reemergence, of ferocious protection. The owl was not just a bird that saw in the dark, it became a living emblem of intuitive knowledge, of seeing through illusion. These icons transformed the overwhelming complexity of the natural world into a stable, shared vocabulary of virtues and powers. They allowed a community to discuss the concept of courage by simply invoking the image of the lion, or to teach the value of patience through the story of the spider. This visual lexicon was remarkably portable and resilient. Unlike a spoken language that could diverge into dialects, a well-established symbol could cross linguistic boundaries and speak directly to the human capacity for pattern recognition. A spiral carved on a megalith in Ireland and another painted on a pot in Anatolia could communicate a similar philosophical understanding of cosmic cycles, even if the creators never met and spoke entirely different tongues. This was a universal language for the ineffable, a way to share the deepest abstractions about existence without a single written word. The symbol was the anchor, and the shared cultural knowledge was the vast sea of meaning it held in place. This symbolic language found its echo not in silence but in sound. A steady, repetitive drumbeat could do more than keep time for a dance. It could systematically dismantle the ordinary boundaries of the conscious mind, guiding a shaman or a seeker into a trance state. This was not an escape from reality, but a deliberate journey into another layer of it. The drum became a sonic tool, an engineered frequency that facilitated access to an altered consciousness, to the abstract concept of an otherworld, a realm of spirits and ancestors. It provided a rhythmic bridge between the tangible world and the intangible, making the idea of a spirit world a repeatable, experiential reality. For the rest of the community, listening to that drumbeat was a shared signal that this journey was underway, reinforcing their collective belief in these unseen dimensions. But the power of sound extended far beyond the shaman's ritual. The human voice itself was a precision instrument for encoding knowledge. Historical narratives, complex genealogies, and intricate laws were woven into the very fabric of chants and songs. The melodic contour of a phrase, the specific rhythm of a line, these were not artistic flourishes. They were mnemonic architecture. A legal precedent was tied to a particular sequence of notes, making it impossible to recall the law without also recalling its musical signature. A family lineage became a rising and falling melody, each generation finding its place in the song's structure. This made vast catalogues of essential information truly unforgettable. You could not forget the tune, and therefore you could not forget the truth it carried. This sonic engineering created a powerful, dual-layer anchor in the human mind. The rhythm and melody attached the abstract information directly to emotion and physical sensation. A somber, slow chant about a great loss from the past would evoke feelings of sorrow and reverence, cementing that historical lesson with a specific emotional weight. A triumphant, energetic song celebrating a cultural hero would link the concept of bravery to a surge of collective pride and excitement. The idea was no longer a dry fact. It was a feeling. It was a memory tied to a melody that could surface unbidden, carrying its full conceptual meaning years later. When an entire community sang these songs together, they were doing more than preserving information. They were performing a collective act of emotional and cognitive alignment. Their voices harmonizing, their bodies moving to the same beat, created a powerful, shared physiological experience. In that moment, the abstract concepts embedded in the song, whether they were laws, histories, or values, ceased to be external rules. They became internal truths, felt in the pulse and the breath of every person present. The music forged an unbreakable link between the individual heart and the collective mind. making the architecture of their shared thought feel as natural and as undeniable as their own heartbeat. The rhythm of the drum and the melody of the chant found their counterpart in the silent, intricate web of human relationships. These pre-literate societies engineered perhaps their most durable abstract structure not from stone or sound, but from the very fabric of the family itself. Their kinship systems were masterful social technologies, complex networks that transformed the abstract chaos of human interaction into a precise and predictable order. A single term like mother's brother was far more than a simple label. It was a dense packet of legal and economic code. This one relationship could define who you could marry, who would inherit your possessions, who was responsible for your education, and who you were obligated to defend in a conflict. The distinction between a father's brother and a mother's brother was not a minor detail of genealogy. It was the difference between two entirely separate sets of rights, duties, and alliances. These systems made invisible concepts like obligation, reciprocity, and social hierarchy fully operational. You did not have to wonder what you owed to another person. The kinship map told you exactly. It was a living constitution, written not on parchment but into the daily language and lived experience of every single person from birth. This cognitive map was then projected outward onto the entire natural world. Through the system of totems and clans, the abstract network of kinship was extended to include animals, plants, and even landscapes. If your clan was associated with the bear, you were not just symbolically linked to it. You were, in a very real social and spiritual sense, related to it. This created a profound and actionable concept of ecological interconnectedness. The bear was your kin. You would not thoughtlessly hunt your kin to extinction. The river that sustained the salmon, who were the kin of another clan, was therefore part of your extended social network. This engineered a powerful sense of stewardship, a deep-seated obligation to maintain the balance of a world you were intrinsically a part of. Long before the word ecology was ever coined, these societies had built a sophisticated model of it, not as a scientific theory, but as a web of sacred relationships. The entire social and natural universe was a single, vast, intelligible network. Every person, every animal, every mountain had a defined place and a set of responsibilities within the grand design. This was the ultimate expression of abstract engineering, a system that organized the complexities of life into a coherent, sustainable, and deeply meaningful whole. This intricate web of kinship was mirrored in the very objects these societies created with their hands. The artisan at work was not merely a craftsperson, but a philosopher in action, using material to give shape to the invisible. Every symmetrical pot emerging from the wheel was a tangible argument for the abstract principle of balance. Its perfect, rounded form was not just a container for grain or water. It was a physical manifestation of harmony, of aesthetic order brought forth from chaotic clay. The potter's hands understood this concept long before it could be defined in words, their skill a dialogue between an ideal form in the mind and the yielding earth in their grasp. The very process of weaving on a loom was a profound act of conceptual engineering. The rhythmic passing of the horizontal weft thread through the vertical warp was far more than a technique for making cloth. It was a physical metaphor for the fabric of society itself, a model of how individual lives, the weft threads, are interlaced with the enduring structure of tradition and lineage, the unchanging warp. To create a textile was to enact the principle of interconnection, to see how separate strands become a single, stronger whole. This was abstract relational thinking made material, a lesson you could hold in your hands and wrap around your body. The knowledge possessed by these early artisans amounted to a sophisticated, applied science. The process of tempering stone, of carefully heating and cooling it to create a sharper, more durable edge, was a masterful application of physics. It represented a deep, conceptual understanding of material properties, of how heat transforms structure. The meticulous mixing of ochre, charcoal, and fat to create a durable pigment for a cave painting was not random experimentation. It was practical chemistry, a conceptual grasp of binders and color fastness, all in service of making an idea permanent on a rock wall. These individuals were engineers of substance, transforming the raw, unthinking stuff of the world into objects of meaning, utility, and beauty. In this light, the creation of a simple tool, a vessel, or a garment becomes a monumental intellectual achievement. It was the act of pulling an abstract concept from the realm of thought and embedding it irrevocably into the physical world. The artisan was giving ideas a body, making the principles of balance, interconnection, and transformation available for all to see, to use, and to understand. Their workshop was a laboratory for the human mind, where the architecture of abstract thought was built, not with words but with wood, clay, and thread. The artisan's workshop was a map of the visible world, but the human mind had already charted far more vast and mysterious territories. These societies engineered elaborate cartographies of the invisible, drafting precise maps of the spirit world, the land of the dead, and the ancestral dreamtime. These were not considered fantasies or metaphors. They were understood as real, operational dimensions of existence, their geographies described with the same meticulous detail as a river valley or a mountain range. A shaman preparing for a journey did not venture into a formless void. They followed specific, well-traveled routes, ascending a cosmic tree, crossing a narrow bridge over a chasm, or sailing a spirit boat down a river of stars. At each landmark, they would encounter defined beings, a gatekeeper at the first junction, a trickster spirit at the winding path, ancestral guides in the luminous fields beyond. This created a coherent and consistent topology of the unseen, a reliable chart that any trained practitioner could navigate. This engineering of non-physical space served a profound purpose. It provided a stable framework for grappling with the most overwhelming abstract concepts a human can face: life, death, illness, and sheer fortune. When a person fell gravely ill, the explanation was not a random biological failure. The shaman's map provided a cause, a soul lost on the spirit trails or captured by a malevolent entity. The cure was not a random herb, but a guided retrieval mission following the established protocol for that specific region of the unseen world. A string of bad luck or a failed hunt was not mere chance. It was a breach of protocol with the ancestors, a debt that needed repayment at a specific shrine in the dreamtime. This system transformed the terrifying abstract concept of the unknown into a manageable landscape. It replaced chaos with causality. It offered not just explanations, but clear procedures for interacting with the forces that lay beyond immediate sensory perception. The invisible world became a place you could learn, a territory you could negotiate with. In mapping the realms of spirit, these early architects were building the first great scaffold for human meaning, a cognitive structure that made the immense mysteries of existence something a community could not only endure but actively engage. This silent language of objects and obligation formed the bedrock of an entire economic system built on the abstract concept of the gift. In these societies, an exchange was never just a simple swap of goods. A gift was a living token, a physical embodiment of a social bond that came with invisible strings attached. When a leader gave a finely crafted spear to a warrior, it was not merely a weapon changing hands. It was a tangible piece of honor being transferred, a public declaration of trust and a silent promise of future loyalty. The object itself was almost secondary. Its true value lay in the unspoken social history it now carried. This created a powerful, ongoing cycle of obligation and reciprocity, an elegant engine for managing human relationships. The system ingeniously prevented conflict by weaving everyone together in a web of mutual debt. You could not easily go to war with someone to whom you owed a profound gift or who was indebted to you. Instead of hoarding resources, status was achieved by giving them away. The most powerful person was not the one with the most possessions, but the one with the widest network of obligations, the person who had given the most away. This was social capital made manifest, a form of wealth that existed entirely in the abstract space between people. It distributed resources throughout the community without a single written contract or a centralized authority dictating the terms. A successful hunter did not just keep his meat, he was expected to share it, transforming surplus food into lasting social prestige and future security. His generosity today became his insurance policy for a lean season tomorrow. This gift economy demonstrated a breathtakingly sophisticated understanding of human psychology and social thermodynamics. It recognized that the most powerful forces in a society are not material, but relational. It engineered a system where the selfish desire for status was channeled into the selfless act of giving, binding the community together with strands of honor, memory, and mutual need. The entire culture became a living, breathing network of gifts given and gifts owed, a magnificent architecture of abstract value that required no currency, only a shared understanding of what it truly means to be connected. Geometry was a language spoken by hands long before it was a subject taught in schools. These first mathematicians saw the world not as a collection of things to count, but as a web of relationships to understand. They grasped proportion by observing the human body, symmetry in the wings of a butterfly, and perfect curves in the arc of a throwing stone. This was an intuitive, embodied mathematics, a knowledge felt in the muscles and seen with the eye. The builders of the great megalithic tombs performed a feat of engineering that seems to defy their era. To create a perfect square corner for a burial chamber, they did not use protractors or written calculations. They used ropes. By stretching a cord knotted into 12 equal segments, they could form a triangle with sides of 3, 4, and 5 units. This triangle, as they discovered through practice, would always contain a perfect right angle. This is the principle of the Pythagorean triple, a cornerstone of geometry, being applied millennia before Pythagoras himself was born. It was a tangible, physical proof of an abstract mathematical truth, pulled taut between their hands. The same genius was at work in the seemingly humble crafts of weaving and basketry. Here, the artisans were composers of a silent, geometric symphony. The over and under pattern of a basket was not just a way to make it hold together. It was a lesson in tessellation, in how shapes can fit together without gap or overlap. The intricate designs woven into a textile were far more than decoration. They were a formal language, a way to encode stories, clan identities, and spiritual beliefs into a repeating sequence of diamonds, zigzags, and spirals. A young woman learning to weave was not just learning a craft. She was learning to think in algorithms, to follow a complex, sequential logic that would result in a pattern holding deep cultural meaning. This application of mathematics was a way to bring a human sense of order to a chaotic world. By imposing geometric patterns on their tools, their homes, and their clothing, they were building a predictable, harmonious environment. The straight line of a furrow in a field, the circular wall of a granary, the symmetrical design on a pot, all of these were declarations of human intention against the wildness of nature. They were using the innate abstract principles of mathematics to create a world that made sense, a world that was measured, balanced and beautifully, profoundly predictable. This shared mental map of the universe was the most ambitious project these societies ever undertook. Cosmology was the grand, unifying architecture that housed all their other abstract concepts, from law and kinship to art and ritual. It was a collectively built framework, a story so vast and so deeply ingrained that it became the very air a society breathed. No single elder or shaman invented this system outright. Instead, it emerged over generations, refined by countless voices around countless fires, each person adding a detail, smoothing an inconsistency, until the narrative was as solid and dependable as the earth beneath their feet. This grand narrative seamlessly wove together the practical and the profound. The predictable path of the stars was not separate from the moral law against theft. Both were expressions of the same cosmic order. A sudden thunderstorm was not just a weather event, it was a message, a reaction to a broken taboo or a communal disharmony. The entire universe, from the largest galaxy to the smallest pebble, was interconnected within this single, explanatory model. It answered the most haunting questions a human can ask. Where did we come from? The creation myth provided the answer, describing how the world emerged from a primordial sea or was sung into being by ancestral giants. Why are we here? The cosmology assigned a role, perhaps as stewards of the land or as children of the sun. What happens when we die? The map of the spirit world provided the destination, a specific realm where one would join the ancestors. This system did more than satisfy curiosity. It provided an unshakable sense of purpose. Your life was not a random accident. It was a note in a cosmic song that began at the dawn of time. Your actions had weight because they either upheld or disrupted this sacred order. This is how cosmology engineered morality. A prohibition against wasting food was not just a practical rule for survival. It was a spiritual imperative, a sign of respect for the animal who gave its life and the earth that produced it, all of which were sacred characters in the cosmic story. To break a kinship law was to tear at the fabric of the universe itself, because those social bonds were mirrored in the relationships between the stars. Every aspect of daily life, from a greeting to a harvest, was a reaffirmation of this grand design. The individual found their identity within this collective story, their personal journey given meaning by the epic journey of their people and their cosmos. The universe was not a cold, empty void. It was a living, breathing, intentional community, and every person had a named, respected place within it. That grand cosmic story provided the ultimate authority, but the daily business of justice required a more immediate kind of engineering. The most complex legal systems thrived for thousands of years without a single line of written law. Justice was an abstract ideal made real through a living process of memory, story, and collective voice. The law was not kept in a locked archive, it was carried in the minds of the elders. These respected individuals were the walking repositories of legal precedent. When a dispute arose, they did not consult a scroll, they recited. They would summon the memory of a similar case from generations past, recounting it not as a dry legal brief, but as a full narrative, complete with characters, choices, and consequences. A story about a stolen axe was never just about the axe. It was a parable about trust, about the duty to a neighbor, and about the proper way to make amends. The principle of fairness was woven into the very fabric of the tale, making the legal lesson both unforgettable and deeply human. The entire community was an essential part of this legal machinery. There were no passive spectators in these gatherings. Every adult member served as witness, as jury, and ultimately as the enforcer of the collective will. A trial was a public airing, a process designed not to simply punish an offender, but to diagnose a tear in the social fabric and to mend it. The goal was always restorative, to bring the individual back into harmony with the group. A judgment might require the guilty party to provide a feast for the wronged family, or to perform a service for the entire village. This was not a fine paid to an abstract state. It was a direct repayment to the community whose peace had been disrupted. The offender had to look into the eyes of those they had harmed and actively work to restore the balance. This system ingeniously embedded the abstract ideals of fairness and balance into daily life. The law was not a distant threat from a powerful ruler. It was the shared conscience of your neighbors, your kin, the people you depended on for survival. To break a rule was not to defy a text, it was to betray a relationship. This made justice profoundly personal and its enforcement incredibly efficient. There were no police because every person was a guardian of the social order. The true punishment was not a sentence, but the loss of standing, the erosion of trust that made life within the community possible. This was law engineered as a living, breathing entity, a constant negotiation that kept the abstract concept of harmony as the central pillar of society. This participatory education began the moment a child could listen. The stories told by the fire were not bedtime entertainment, they were the primary textbooks of the culture. A tale about a great hunter who failed to show gratitude to the spirit of the deer was not just a fable, it was a direct lesson in the abstract principle of reciprocity with the natural world. The child did not just hear the story, they felt the hunter's hunger in the narrative's climax. They saw the empty forests in their mind's eye. The lesson was encoded not as a rule to be memorized, but as an emotional truth to be felt. This emotional encoding made the knowledge incredibly sticky, a memory tied to a sense of fear, awe, or inspiration that would guide their actions when they finally held a spear in their own hands. The story engineered a complete framework, linking the physical skill of the hunt directly to its spiritual and ethical context. You did not just learn how to track, you learned why the track mattered in the grand scheme of life and death. This learning was then cemented through direct apprenticeship, a form of knowledge transfer that engaged every sense. A young potter did not learn from a manual. They sat for years beside a master, their hands guided by experienced fingers, their eyes studying the exact pressure needed to center the clay, their ears attuned to the subtle sound of the wheel spinning true. They absorbed the craft through a kind of osmotic learning where the knowledge passed directly from one body to another. This was not just about making a pot. It was about internalizing the concept of patience, of feeling the rightness of a symmetrical form, of understanding the transformation of raw earth into a vessel of beauty and utility. The master would not explain the physics of the wheel, the apprentice would come to feel it in their bones. This multi-sensory immersion made the knowledge unforgettable because it was woven into the very fabric of their physical being. The final and perhaps most powerful layer of this pedagogy was ritual reenactment. A young person did not simply hear a lecture about their people's history. They put on a mask and became an ancestral hero in a ceremonial dance. They did not just learn about the concept of bravery, they physically performed it, their heart pounding with the drumbeat, their muscles straining in the symbolic struggle. This transformed abstract historical events and ethical concepts into lived physical experiences. The knowledge was no longer something external to be recalled. It was a memory stored in their muscles, a truth branded onto their nervous system. This holistic system engineered a complete and integrated worldview. There was no separation between a practical skill and its philosophical meaning. To weave was to understand interconnection. To hunt was to practice sacred reciprocity. To build a home was to enact cosmic order. Every action, no matter how mundane, was a thread in the larger tapestry of meaning, and through this active, participatory education, every individual understood exactly where their thread belonged. The great monuments stood as fixed points in a world of flowing time, but the minds that built them perceived time itself as a deep, turning wheel. For these architects of thought, the past was not a sealed archive. It was a living, breathing presence, a layer of reality that existed alongside the daily present. They engineered a radical concept of time, one that was profoundly cyclical and multi-layered. The ancestral past, what some cultures call the dream time, was not a distant memory. It was an eternal now, a continuous source of power and law that could be accessed and even walked within. This was not a philosophical abstraction. It was a practical reality engineered through ritual. During a major ceremony, the community did not merely commemorate a creation story. They performed it through specific chants, dances, and symbols. They were understood to be collapsing the distance between the present moment and the sacred past. They were not acting out the story of the first sunrise. They were becoming the people of the first sunrise, channeling its original power into their contemporary world. This ritual technology made the foundational acts of creation a renewable resource, a wellspring of meaning and order that could be tapped into whenever the community needed to be reaffirmed or healed. You could step out of the linear flow of days and into the eternal moment where the world was born. This cyclical understanding was mirrored in the earthly realm by the relentless turn of the seasons. Time was not measured by the impersonal tick of a clock, but by the participatory rhythm of communal life. The festival of the first seeds was not a date on a calendar. It was the smell of freshly turned earth, the weight of the seed basket in your hands, the shared prayers sung into the wind. The harvest celebration was the taste of the first fruit, the ache of tired limbs, the sight of a full granary. Time was experienced through the body and the senses, a collective performance of the great cycles of life, death, and rebirth. This complex temporal engineering allowed people to navigate a world where the spiritual and the mundane were not separate domains. A person could be planting a field in the bright sun of the present, while their mind and spirit were also aligned with the ancestral beings who first taught the art of planting in the timeless dreamtime. The past was a council of elders constantly whispering guidance. The future was not a blank slate, but the next inevitable turn of the great wheel, a return to spring after winter, a renewal promised by the very structure of the cosmos. In this worldview, nothing was truly lost to the past, and the future held no fear of the unknown, for it was simply the past preparing to be born again. This deep, cyclical time was rooted in a single, revolutionary idea that humanity is not a master of nature, but a thread within its living fabric. These architects engineered a worldview of profound interconnection, a seamless web where every action rippled through the entire system. A hunter did not simply take an animal, he entered into a sacred negotiation. Before the hunt, there were rituals of apology and respect directed toward the spirit of the herd. After a successful kill, there were ceremonies of gratitude, acknowledging the creature's willing sacrifice. The bones might be treated with reverence, returned to the earth in a way that promised the animal's return in another form. This was not superstition. It was a sophisticated systems thinking protocol, a way of maintaining a balanced relationship with a co-inhabitant of the world. The animal had agency, it had value beyond its calories, and taking its life was a solemn transaction within a larger economy of life and death. This same ethic was engineered into the very first agricultural practices. A farmer did not just plant seeds in dirt. She worked with a living partner, the earth itself. The soil was not an inert resource to be depleted, but a sacred entity to be honored. Offerings might be made before the first planting, songs sung to encourage the seeds, and specific plots left fallow to allow the land to rest and recover its strength. This was a long-term contract with the ecosystem, an understanding that you could not continuously take without also giving back. It was a practical application of the abstract concept of reciprocity, ensuring the community's survival for generations by actively maintaining the health of the system that sustained them. Their navigation of the world reflected this deep relational knowledge. A Polynesian voyager setting out across the vast, empty Pacific did not see a trackless void. He read a living map written in the patterns of the stars, the direction of the swells, the flight paths of distant birds, and the temperature and taste of the water itself. He knew that the island he sought was part of an interconnected system, its presence subtly signaled through these natural indicators. The wind was not an impersonal force, but a character in the journey to be understood and cooperated with. This was not just wayfinding, it was a continuous conversation with a sentient world. Every element, from the smallest plant to the largest ocean current, was seen as an active participant in a shared existence. This interconnected worldview engineered a powerful and sustainable ecological ethic. The forest was not timber, it was a relative. The river was not a plumbing system, it was a life-giving ancestor. To pollute the water or clear-cut the forest was not an economic decision. It was a violation of kinship, a tear in the very fabric of reality. This ancient, engineered understanding of a living, interconnected world is a truth that our own society, grappling with environmental crises, is only now struggling to relearn. They built their entire civilization on the principle that you are a part of the landscape, not apart from it. This impulse to craft beauty from raw materials runs far deeper than simple decoration. The symmetrical patterns etched into an antler, the vivid ochre handprints stenciled on a cave wall, these were profound declarations against chaos. In a world of unpredictable storms and fleeting lives, the creation of something balanced, harmonious, and beautiful was an act of pure cognitive engineering. It was a way to make the abstract ideal of order something you could see with your eyes and hold in your hands. A perfectly symmetrical pot did not just hold water. It presented an argument for balance, its flawless form a silent lesson in how the world could and should be. The repetitive, geometric designs woven into a textile were more than ornament. They were a visual algorithm, a demonstration of predictable, repeating logic that calmed the mind and reassured the spirit. This aesthetic drive was a fundamental tool for world building. By imposing human-defined patterns of color and form onto the wildness of nature, these societies were constructing a mental refuge, a habitable world that made sense. The very act of selecting a specific red clay for a pigment, or of patiently carving a spiral into a piece of ivory, was a meditation on the principles of selection, arrangement, and purpose. It transformed random raw materials into a coherent statement. This crafted beauty also served as a powerful social adhesive. The distinctive patterns painted on pottery or tattooed onto skin were a silent language of belonging. They instantly communicated clan, status, and a shared set of values. To create and wear these beautiful objects was to carry your community's ideals on your very body, making the abstract concept of cultural identity a tangible, daily reality. The beautiful object became a bridge, connecting the individual's sensory experience to the group's deepest philosophical truths. In this way, the pursuit of beauty was never a luxury. It was a vital technology for survival, a way to engineer a world of meaning from the raw, chaotic stuff of existence. This deliberate shift in consciousness was one of their most sophisticated technologies. The steady, hypnotic rhythm of a drum or the exhausting, repetitive movements of a dance were not random activities. they were precise instruments engineered to methodically quiet the everyday mind and open a gateway to a different layer of perception. This was a systematic process for accessing the vast, abstract territory of the non-ordinary, a realm understood to hold the divine, the ancestral, and the deepest wells of the subconscious. The individual undertaking this journey, the shaman or the seeker, was not losing control. They were exercising a profound form of it, using their body and their will as a vehicle to travel into the architecture of the unseen. The knowledge gained in these states was not considered a private hallucination. It was vital intelligence, a form of data retrieved from the source and brought back for the community's benefit. A healer might enter a trance to locate the spiritual root of a physical illness, perceiving the ailment as a dark, intrusive presence that could be negotiated with or removed. An artist might receive a vision of a new pattern, a complex geometric design that would then be translated onto pottery or woven into a textile, enriching the entire culture's visual language. A leader facing a difficult decision might seek a vision to understand the potential consequences of a path of action, interpreting the symbols that arose as a map of future possibilities. These practices acknowledged a radical truth that the waking, rational mind is not the sole source of valuable knowledge. The most profound insights, the most creative inspirations, and the most direct experiences of the sacred often reside just beyond its normal boundaries. By engineering methods to cross that threshold, these societies built a reliable bridge to the abstract. They created a repeatable, communal protocol for tapping into a wellspring of guidance and innovation that was, for them, as real and as essential as the ground beneath their feet. These engineered landscapes of the mind found their ultimate expression in the architecture of the sacred. The design of a stone circle or the selection of a deep cave was never arbitrary. It was a precise psychological technology, a machine built not for production, but for profound, abstract encounter. The architects of these spaces understood that to make a concept like the divine or the ancestral feel real, they had to orchestrate an entire sensory experience. The very journey to such a place was the first part of the ritual. Walking for miles across open land to reach a secluded henge created a sense of separation from the mundane world, preparing the mind for a shift in perception. Upon arrival, the architecture itself took over. The massive, towering stones were not just symbols of power, they physically diminished the individual, creating an immediate and humbling sense of scale that made the vastness of the cosmos feel palpably close. Acoustics were a masterfully manipulated tool. Inside a deep, painted cave, the flickering torchlight would cast dancing shadows on the walls, but the true magic often happened in the sound. A single chant or the strike of a drum would reverberate through the cavernous spaces, creating a disorienting cascade of echoes. This sonic chaos broke down normal cognitive patterns, blurring the line between the internal self and the external environment. The sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, as if the very walls were speaking. This was not an accident. It was an engineered auditory phenomenon designed to dissolve the ordinary mind and open it to the extraordinary. In a stone circle, a whisper spoken at the exact center might be perfectly audible to a person standing at the periphery, while words spoken just a few feet away were lost. This created a web of invisible connection, making the space itself feel intelligent and alive, a participant in the ritual. Sightlines were calculated with a breathtaking precision that still confounds modern engineers. A narrow entrance passage to a tomb like Newgrange in Ireland was aligned so that only on the dawn of the winter solstice would a single shaft of sunlight pierce the inner darkness, illuminating a sacred spiral carved deep within. This was not just a calendar, it was a dramatic architectural performance of the abstract concept of rebirth. The entire structure was built to frame this one fleeting event, transforming the sun from a distant star into an active character that engaged directly with human construction. For the community gathered inside that cold, dark chamber, the slow crawl of that golden beam across the floor was a physical proof of cosmic promise, a yearly renewal of the world's contract with life. The architecture made the invisible cycle of death and rebirth something you could witness with your own eyes. The very act of entering these spaces was a symbolic journey into abstraction. To crawl on your hands and knees into the deepest chamber of a cave was to leave the known world behind. The descent into increasing darkness, dampness, and silence was a physical metaphor for a descent into the underworld, into the subconscious, into the raw material of existence before it was shaped by human hands. The paintings of animals found in these deepest, most inaccessible chambers were not a public gallery. They were encounters. In the flickering light, the images appeared to move, to breathe. The act of placing your hand on the wall and blowing pigment over it to create a stencil was not just making art. It was a merging, a way of leaving your own mark within the body of the earth, of touching the ancestral realm. These spaces were the original virtual reality, meticulously crafted environments that triggered specific emotional and cognitive states. They engineered awe, they manufactured mystery, and they built transcendence, stone by deliberate stone, echo by calculated echo, making the most profound abstractions a shared, tangible reality for every person who stepped across their threshold. These invisible boundaries were engineered with a single, powerful word, taboo. This was not merely a list of forbidden things, but a sophisticated social technology for defining the sacred and the dangerous. A taboo created a behavioral fence around an abstract concept, making it tangible through prohibition. By declaring a certain food forbidden or a specific action unthinkable, a society was not just imposing a random rule. It was constructing a shared understanding of purity, a collective agreement on where the safe, orderly world ended and the chaotic, polluting realm began. The power of this system lay in its complete integration. The rule was not seen as a human invention, but as a fundamental law of the universe, as real and unchangeable as the rising sun. A prohibition against eating a particular animal, for instance, might be framed as a sacred covenant with that creature's spirit. To break this taboo was not just to disobey an elder, it was to tear at the fabric of cosmic order itself, inviting calamity upon the entire community. This ingeniously linked the abstract need for social cohesion to a tangible, fearful consequence, making compliance a matter of collective survival. The enforcement was not carried out by police or courts, but by the weight of supernatural sanction and the relentless pressure of social stigma. The fear of divine retribution was matched by the terror of becoming an outcast, a person whose very presence was considered a contamination. This dual enforcement made the system incredibly efficient, requiring no written legal code or specialized enforcers. Every single person became a guardian of these invisible walls, watching, judging, and upholding the boundaries that kept their world intact. The genius of taboo becomes clear when we see its practical functions. A prohibition against entering a sacred grove might seem purely spiritual, but it also functioned as a conservation law, preserving a vital watershed or a habitat for hunted animals. A complex set of food taboos could protect public health, preventing the consumption of scavengers or spoiled meat that could carry disease. Rules governing marriage and kinship, declaring certain relationships taboo, prevented internal conflict and ensured the healthy genetic and social exchange between different family groups. These were not superstitious edicts, but encoded wisdom, practical solutions to the problems of survival and social stability, wrapped in the unquestionable authority of the sacred. The taboo transformed a practical necessity into a self-evident truth, making the architecture of society feel as natural and as immutable as the landscape itself. A mask was far more than a disguise. It was a conceptual tool of immense power. When a shaman placed the carved visage of a bear over his face, he was not engaging in simple theater. He was undergoing a profound transformation, stepping into a role that allowed him to channel the abstract force of bear power itself. This was not pretending, it was a form of temporary embodiment, a technology for making the intangible suddenly, viscerally present. The mask and the accompanying costume were the interface, the hardware that allowed a human consciousness to temporarily host a cosmic archetype. The community watching this transformation did not see their neighbor. They saw the bear spirit made manifest, its strength, its healing knowledge, and its protective ferocity now walking among them. This ritualized role play provided a safe, structured container for exploring the most complex and often dangerous aspects of existence. How does a society grapple with the concept of death? It does not just talk about it. A designated individual wearing the mask of the ancestor or the death spirit would physically enter the village. The community could then interact with this embodied concept, asking questions, making offerings, and confronting their fears in a controlled, symbolic dialogue. The person behind the mask was a conduit, and the mask itself was the filter that separated the individual from the immense abstract force they were channeling. This practice allowed for a direct, experiential understanding of the cosmos. A dancer wearing a lightning mask did not just represent a storm, they became the chaotic, creative, and destructive power of the storm itself. Their jerky, explosive movements made the concept of atmospheric violence something the community could see and feel in their own bodies, a shared somatic experience of a natural force. This was how they conducted experiments with the human psyche and the nature of reality. By stepping into these archetypal roles, individuals could explore aspects of themselves and their world that were otherwise too vast, too frightening, or too abstract to approach directly. The mask was a key that unlocked a door in the mind, allowing both the wearer and the witness to step through and interact with the fundamental architectures of their thought. The land itself was their library, and every feature on it was a book. These societies did not build their memory palaces from imagined spaces, they constructed them from the living earth. A distant, jagged mountain peak was not just a geological formation, it was the petrified body of a great ancestral being, frozen in time for all to see. A winding river was not merely flowing water, it was the physical trail of the serpent creator who shaped the valleys in the dreamtime. Each rock outcrop, each spring, each ancient tree was a named and storied place, a permanent node in a vast geographical network of knowledge. To walk across this landscape was to actively read from a sacred text. A hunter guiding his son to a new hunting ground would not recite a dry list of directions. He would tell the story of the lightning-struck oak where the first fire was stolen from the sky gods. He would point to the curve in the river where the trickster spirit was outwitted, a tale that also contained a crucial lesson about resourcefulness. The journey became a living recitation, a constant reinforcement of the community's laws, its history, and its very identity. This was memory engineered on a colossal scale. By externalizing their most vital abstract concepts onto the immutable features of the world around them, these architects made forgetting almost impossible. You could not forget the law of hospitality when you passed the standing stone where two warring clans first shared a meal. You could not lose the creation myth when you drank from the spring that burst forth where the world's first tears fell. History was not a subject in a book, it was the hill you climbed every day. Mythology was not a separate belief, it was the river that gave you water. The land and the mind became a single, integrated system. The physical world was no longer a neutral backdrop for human drama. It was an active participant, a teacher, a legal charter, and a divine scripture, all woven seamlessly into the daily experience of life. This mnemonic landscape ensured that the architecture of their thought was as enduring as the mountains and as ever-present as the air they breathed. The very structure of language itself became a tool for building abstract thought. Without a written dictionary to fix definitions, the spoken word was a living, evolving technology, engineered to hold complex ideas through its very grammar and sound. Consider the intricate verb tenses found in many oral languages. They did more than just indicate past or future. They could express whether an action was witnessed personally or heard about from others, whether an event was completed or is still ongoing in its effects. This created a sophisticated, nuanced relationship with the concept of truth and time, building layers of reality and accountability directly into the fabric of everyday speech. A rich vocabulary for kinship terms was another form of conceptual engineering. A single word could precisely define a relationship, distinguishing a mother's brother from a father's brother, and with that distinction came an entire set of predefined social roles, obligations, and privileges. The language itself contained the blueprint for the entire social structure, ensuring everyone understood their place and duties within the abstract network of the community. Metaphor served as the primary engine for generating new abstract ideas. When a culture had no existing word for an intangible concept like justice or courage, they would borrow from the tangible world. Justice might be described as a straight path, courage as a sturdy oak tree standing firm in a storm. These were not just pretty phrases. They were cognitive bridges, allowing the mind to grasp a slippery, invisible idea by connecting it to something physical and familiar. This constant, creative process of metaphorical thinking allowed oral cultures to expand their conceptual universe, continually building new understanding from the raw materials of their sensory experience. The deep, guttural sound for earth might be echoed in the word for body, reinforcing a philosophical connection between the human form and the soil. The word for spirit might whisper with the same sibilant breath as the word for wind. These sonic relationships, embedded in the language, subtly trained the mind to see the invisible links between the material and the immaterial worlds. To ensure these complex structures survived, oral languages developed powerful mnemonic architecture. Formal speech, especially for laws, histories, and myths, was saturated with patterns of alliteration, rhythm, and repetition. Think of the rhythmic cadence of a chief reciting a tribal agreement. The repetition of certain sounds and the steady, predictable beat were not merely artistic. They acted as cognitive glue, making long sequences of information stick in the memory. A legal precedent was easier to recall when it was phrased with a repeating initial sound, just as a genealogy became unforgettable when it followed a specific melodic contour. This sonic engineering turned speech into a durable storage medium. The most vital information was not stored in a fragile scroll, but in a robust, rhythmic chant that could be accurately passed down for generations. We still walk through the ghost of this ancient technology every day. The rhythmic patterns in our poetry, the comforting predictability of a nursery rhyme, even the catchy jingles we cannot get out of our heads, are all echoes of a time when the human voice was the primary library, and sound was the surest way to etch an abstract idea into the collective mind. Our modern languages are living archives, carrying the fossilized impressions of these ancient cognitive tools, revealing how our ancestors so masterfully sculpted speech itself to build, hold, and transmit the invisible architecture of their world. This fluid architecture of thought possessed a resilience that often eludes our own written certainties. The abstract concepts of pre-literate societies did not just survive, they thrived for millennia, bending without breaking under the immense pressures of conquest, migration, and environmental upheaval. Their strength came from their very nature. They were not centralized doctrines locked onto fragile parchment. They were distributed systems living in the rhythm of a dance, the lines of a song, the shape of a pot, and the path of a river. A written law carved in stone is immutable, its meaning fixed and vulnerable to being toppled, eroded, or simply misunderstood by future generations who no longer speak its language. But a law embedded in a story is different. The core principle of justice remains, but the story's details, its characters, even its setting, can shift subtly over time to reflect new realities, new neighbors, new challenges, all while preserving the essential truth at its heart. This was a living, breathing philosophy, constantly being reaffirmed and gently reshaped by the very people who lived by its codes. Its meaning was not something you looked up in a scroll. It was something you felt in your bones during an initiation, something you saw with your own eyes at the solstice alignment, something you tasted in the shared meal of a harvest festival. This deep personal ownership made the system incredibly robust. You cannot easily force a people to abandon a truth that they themselves perform, a truth that is sung by their mothers and carved into the hills of their homeland. The conqueror might burn a village, but he could not burn the stories held in 1,000 minds. He might ban a language, but he could not silence the meaning encoded in the constellations overhead or the sacred spring that continued to flow. The knowledge was too diffuse, too deeply integrated into the ecosystem of daily life to be eradicated by a single blow. This is why so many indigenous worldviews have survived centuries of concerted cultural suppression, their core concepts enduring precisely because they were never dependent on a single book or a central temple. They were woven into the very fabric of how people live, feel, and remember. This offers a profound lesson in the nature of knowledge itself, that the most enduring ideas are not those carved in stone, but those etched into the human heart through shared experience. The true monument left by these ancient architects is not made of stone, but of mind. Our journey reveals that the societies who walked this earth long before the first scribe were not primitive. They were profound engineers of the abstract. With no clay tablets or parchment, they built the very foundations of human consciousness using the tools they had: memory, voice, and the living earth itself. They looked upon a chaotic, untamed world and saw not disorder but a canvas for meaning. From the precise alignments of Stonehenge to the rhythmic pulse of a communal chant, they crafted intricate systems that gave durable shape to existence. They engineered justice from collective story, time from solar alignment, and connection to the cosmos from the very landscape they inhabited. Their greatest invention was not a tool, but a framework, a way for humanity to understand its place in a vast and mysterious universe. This legacy is not locked away in a dusty past. It lives on, breathing in the deep structures of our languages, in the archetypal patterns of our stories, and in our innate human drive to find pattern and purpose in everything we see. The symmetrical design on your coffee mug, the catchy rhythm of a song you cannot forget, the deep comfort of a family story told and retold, these are all echoes of that ancient cognitive technology. As we reflect on their sheer ingenuity, we are reminded of a profound and humbling truth. The capacity for abstract thought is not a product of literacy. It is a fundamental trait of the human mind, a spark of genius that transcends any specific technology. The architects of pre-writing thought built the cognitive cathedral we all still inhabit. Their story challenges us to expand our definition of intelligence and to listen for the whispers of their engineered world in the quiet spaces of our own.